Hi, I'm Erin, and you're watching the conversation about The Shepherd and the Sound by Presence Creative Arts, featuring Jason Hildebrand. The Shepherd and the Sound is a contemplative film, a slow, cinematic experience imagined from the life of David from the Bible. This is a spiritual story, the journey of one man and how he has heard the voice of the eternal, the sound, throughout his life. In each episode recorded throughout the film's release, we discuss how David's ancient story provides healing and comfort for the anxious and disconnected culture of today. Before we join the Presence Creative Arts crew, let's do one thing together. Let's take a breath in, hold, and breathe out. Are you ready? Let's breathe in, hold it, and breathe out slowly. We are so glad that you're here today. There is something for you here.
One of the things we wanted to talk about was this idea of slow cinema or slowing things down. I had this little epiphany where I was talking with Erin, who's on our team, and I said, what about the term cinematic rest, where you're actually engaging with like a cinematic world, but you leave it feeling rested and peaceful, as opposed to, I think a lot of times with the great stuff that's happening now in the world, like we were talking about The Diplomat and how great the writing is with that, and the tension level's high. But I leave The Diplomat completely stressed out at the end of it because the stakes are so high. Whereas I think with our film, I'm hoping people have had space to actually move through their life, find themselves in the story, and then come out in a peaceful state rather than in a completely distressed state.
Yes. I think that's great. I mean, I think we should almost clip that comment and come back to it once we kind of know what film we're making. Or we made here. Yeah. So let's talk about,
sure.
Let's start at the beginning,
sure.
Work our way through it, and then deal with that a little bit more. So I've just put some questions together because, we don't have anyone interviewing us, so we're here to discuss
That's right.
So.
We're the podcast.
Yeah.
We're the non-host.
Exactly.
Non-host podcast.
We're hosting our own discussion
That's
of the
right.
film. Okay, so just give me the origin of this film.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's close to 30 years ago. I was in acting school, and I saw a guy named Bruce Kuhn do a solo show on the Book of Luke, and I had balked at going. My girlfriend, who's now my wife, was at McMaster University, and she said, "Oh, come to this event. There's this Christian actor." And I thought, "Oh man, crappy Christian art. I don't want to go see that." But she talked me into coming. And it was a packed theater. There must have been 300 or 400 people there. And I was in the middle of my degree, and I was struggling with all the moral ambiguity of all the things that I was having to portray and do. And, as a young actor and as somebody of faith, was just trying to wrestle through, how do I be an actor and how do I have a relationship with God and all those kind of things. Anyway, I saw this guy perform, and I was totally blown away. And he did the Book of Luke. He played all the parts. And I was my jaw was on the floor. I couldn't believe it. I think that's the first time that scripture actually made sense to me, when somebody kind of infleshed it. I'd never seen anybody do that. So fast forward, then I finished acting school, and then I wrote this show on the life of David. And it took about a year to write it. And then I remember rehearsing it in my parents' pink-walled basement when I was in my early 20s, and with Tom Carson, who's worked with us for years, and then toured it all over the world. And that was the start of my career and the start of our company, and the whole thing. Would have never predicted it. Fast forward even more to, I guess, maybe a decade later, started to think about how can we turn this thing into a film. It feels like it's cinematic, feels like it might make sense. And then, another 5 years go by, and we find the money to go and do a location scout, you and I. We'd been talking about it for a long time. And then the pandemic hits, and we're like, well, I guess that's not happening. But what the pandemic did was it caused us to move from primarily a theater company and a communication company into cinema a little bit more. I mean, that's your background is cinema and film and media, and so we shot these Psalms. The idea was in the pandemic that social media was so negative and kind of like you never leave flipping through social media and feel like your soul is full. And we wondered what it would be like to could we take some of these Psalms, which are kind of like the cries of the heart. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, and I was saying, like, if you can't find your personal experience in the Psalms, then something is wrong, because every expression of the human heart is in the Psalms. So we shot these 7 Psalms with different actors and just short films, you and I, 3-4 minutes long, and found that it was really nourishing to the soul for people. And so then when the pandemic finished and we found a little bit more money, you and I went to Scotland to location scout this thing, and ended up finding ourselves in northern Scotland amidst these rugged and beautiful and sparse landscapes. And we both thought, this is the right place, even though it was weird to think that was the right place.
Yeah, I remember. I think you're right. Maybe 5 years before the start of this project, we were talking about doing David, and it was always, there was always one scenario where you're basically filming a theater show,
right?
Because it was you doing the characters. The show is very powerful, but it's somewhat comedic, even.
Yeah.
It's built around that kind of idea,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we could really never get our eyes or our head totally around how we were going to do that. Which
right.
I think was the challenge.
Yeah, and then we thought, maybe we should shoot a full feature with like a actual feature film with all the characters. And I remember like writing a treatment of that and then feeling like, it's still not, like it loses the thing that it was by shifting completely to a full feature, like a full cast feature.
Yes. I mean, I think that's the problem with so many of sort of biblical adaptations or adaptations of historical work where you have pieces, but
right.
not, a complete biography of a person.
Right.
And
right.
you're filling that stuff in. So, I mean, I remember that being a challenge that we never overcame. I remember you coming and saying, okay, I think this thing should be in Scotland. Let's go to Scotland.
Yeah.
So I remember getting there in Scotland and seeing this landscape, and we can get into what the landscape ends up being, but feeling like that was okay. There's something here. It's powerful. But then literally sitting down with the script to your show, saying, "Well, what can this be?"
Right.
So I mean, what do you think? What do you remember about the evolution there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were trying to figure out how to turn it from something that you're present with the audience. So you've got this audience feedback into something that makes sense cinematically. So how do you strip away the stuff that's theater and make it more cinematic? And so, a lot of the language goes, and, when we went and shot the first time, we went 3 times, but when you went and shot the first time, it was a lot of storytelling. And then I think when we came back from that initial shoot, we went, it's still too much storytelling and not enough cinematic moments. And that was we learned on the fly in this project. I mean, doing it the right way would be to come in and know how it works. Although I've been listening to a lot of, interviews with filmmakers, and I'm realizing that oftentimes, even in things like The Dark Knight, or like you come in with an idea and then you kind of go see where it might take you, where you think, well, we weren't shooting a multi-million, $10 million project or anything like that. So I'm like, wow, I can't believe they're doing that with, or like let's say the X-Men, the first X-Men. I mean, I don't think Bryan Singer had any idea what he was building when he was building it, and it turned into this franchise that launched a whole thing. But I think that we on the fly realized what it wasn't, and then as you and I went back, we started to realize what it could become, which was something I think I didn't anticipate. Although I think it's also part of where you and I have been spiritually in terms of trying to figure out like how do we listen spiritually, how do we connect emotionally with what's going on in our lives and what's going on in the world. And that, I think that, I mean, as an artist, I think you always create what you need. And I think we ended up crafting the thing that I personally needed, but didn't even know I needed.
Right. Yeah, let's get to, I mean, I remember going away saying, okay, we know that, and we can kind of get to the landscape after, but we know there's a landscape.
Yeah.
We know it's a story of David. We know it's we decided that it was going to be just you as a character.
Right.
Remember that on our first scouting trip, we decided that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And you went away, we were looking for inroads to how to create this thing. The other thing I distinctly remember knowing, which played a big part in this, I think, is that this was not the story that you created a quarter century before.
Absolutely.
So you were, at that time, you were a quarter century younger. And
just a little younger.
And, so it's a different story. So, I mean, I think we were both very cognizant that the character of you now had to play in this story.
Right.
So, the next step was going and writing the script.
Yeah.
So how did that happen?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's when I created it, I was, early 20s and used to jump off stages and run around. I mean, part of the joy of the 20-year-old Jason doing this live show was it was like a guy running around telling a story. Like, it was very physical. It was very active. And, it's just, when you're 30 years later or 25 years later, you're just a different human being. And so we wanted to, so I went back and we started to pull back the layers of what are the themes we wanted to talk about, what were the stories, even some of the stories, like what are the stories that are relevant to our current cultural moment, and then how do we get under the skin of David in a way, cinematically, in a way that allows the audience to engage with like such a messy character. But I think always in the back of my head was how do we get them to engage with this messy character but provide hope? It's my single greatest frustration with Hollywood, is that they have got really good at being honest and vulnerable with their characters, and then they leave you in this disaster and go, well, good luck with your life. And I think that that's very irresponsible art. I'm not talking happy endings. I'm not talking Hallmark. I'm talking like, how do we leave people in a space at the end of an artistic experience, and in our case, a film, where people have something to hope for? And so I think that kind of having the hope in the back of the head was one of the driving through lines of like, how do we get from, how do we build a beginning, middle, and end that allows us to have hope at the end?
So another way into, I think, the scripting that's very telling is that we ended up with a film called The Shepherd and the Sound.
Yeah, right.
So where did that come from?
Yeah, well, I mean, you and I had countless discussions about, what is a fresh, unique way to come into this story? Because we all, if you've grown up in any kind of religious framework, whether it be in a Christian framework or a Jewish framework, or somebody that has walked through the scriptures, we've all we know the story of David, and even culturally, most people know the story of David and Goliath, and I mean, even funny enough, they used that phrase with the Dodgers and the Jays recently, and unfortunately Goliath won, but that's a whole other scenario. But we were trying to find our way into it, and one of the things we've been discussing in our company Presence is what is a new way of speaking about spiritual things that is helpful to grapple with those things in our cultural moment. And so I was listening to this podcast with Brene Brown and Bono. And both of those people have been very influential in my life, and so it was incredible. It's a two-parter podcast on Brene Brown's podcast, and Bono was talking about a season where he was kind of like discombobulated, not doing well, and he was on stage, and U2 was playing, and he said he had to stick his head next to the Larry Mullen's kick drum, and just so that he could hear the sound of the drum, and the sound of that drum kind of recentered himself, and he had this epiphany that grace was a sound. Amazing grace, how great the sound. as this boom, boom, boom happening, I thought, oh, what if we framed the presence of God as sound?
Real connection with the eternal inspires intentional creative expression that fills all voids, that repairs every trauma, and remembers true identity. When we create and when we consume, we can actually be restored. Don't go another year without making space for this. The Shepherd and the Sound film, immersive gallery encounter, community encounter. Bring transformative experiences to your community. Contact info@presencecreativearts.com. We look forward to connecting with you. We have made space for you.
What if we framed the presence of God as sound? What could that look like if we, in the film, that was the way through? I had never heard that framing of God or Holy Spirit, or, I'd never heard it before. And so came back to you and I was like, what do you think of this? And you're like, yeah, that sounds good. And so then we could approach the script again with this idea that we were coming at it in an entirely different way. And the sound opens up all these other things. It opens up the score in a way. It opens up the soundtrack of the film in a different way. It just changes the dynamic of how we come at this thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there was two key things that helped the story develop. Number one was the idea of the sound.
Yeah.
So we had a way into that, but that was really paired with this being a story about you. I remember you speaking about it not being you playing David, but it had to also embody you in some way, which I think was very interesting. So a big part of that was you being not 25. I mean, you had to be able to look at the story, and some of what happened in that story was stuff that happened to a very young man.
Yes.
So there was no way you weren't going to be acting as an 18-year-old kid in this story. So we had to think through what we were going to do with that.
Yeah, I had to find. Yeah, and I think ultimately, I don't know if we would articulate this at the beginning of the process, but ultimately what we got to by the end was realizing that I wanted the story to read me, and we wanted the film to allow the audience to be read as well, so that people would find themselves in the story. I don't think we started with a story about David, and we ended with a vehicle for people to find themselves in the story. I think it still tells the story of David. I think it does all those things, but it really gives space for people to drop down into moments that resonate with them. And that's what happened with me, is that we found these moments all the way through where Jason, because I had worked on it for so long, where my personal life intersected with David's life, and I think that's where those are the moments that are really special.
Mm. Yeah, I think that led to kind of the second. I think I was trying to be pragmatic and saying we need at some level a structure for this film.
Absolutely.
Because we can't. If your theater show sort of very loosely goes from the beginning to the end,
right?
We're starting with a guy closer to the latter part of that discussion than the earlier.
That's right.
So we needed a way to come at this. So I think that was, to me, that was most interesting is that all the David perspective stuff is really the David and Goliath stuff. Like it's a young man, that we think about. And we don't talk a lot about who that man would have been in his 50s instead of in his 20s.
Yeah, which is mostly a disaster. I mean, we've talked about that after the glory days and after he becomes king and defeats all these foes, and there's once peace happens in the land, David just is on a trajectory into the abyss until the very end, where he seems to come out again, and he's all by himself. Everybody's gone. All of his kids got what they want, and he was a terrible dad. And finally, he makes a good decision again at the end, anointing Solomon as king, rather, through Samuel's passed by then. But So we, and I think, it probably has to do with moving into middle age as we move into this place of like reflecting on our lives. And so we see that through the lens of David, where he's looking back at he's looking back and disconnected from God and the eternal and from himself. He's like really disconnected, and he's trying to find equilibrium again. And I think that, I don't know anybody who's in the middle of their life that isn't having this kind of look back and go, did I do all right? What did I screw up? What's next? All those kind of things. And so I think probably timely for me personally, but I think culturally timely, as there's so much chaos going on in culture right now. There's so much division and different sides. If having a little bit of an introspective approach on what got you where you are is a helpful thing in this cultural moment.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, for me, that was that unlocked kind of the next piece in the story, because you felt like you've got a guy who we don't have much of a voice for in the scripture, really.
Yep.
Like in the older David, we don't, we hear what happens to him, but we hear a lot less about what's going on in his heart, what's going on in his mind. And what connected it for me was probably kind of bringing together one of my favorite books in the Bible with Ecclesiastes, which was kind of the next piece in that in my mind, which was thinking like, hold on a second. That book's attributed to Solomon, who's of course David's son. And Solomon these ideas didn't come from nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, this is part of a lineage, it's part of an experience.
Yeah.
And, the idea of what would David have felt like at those times. And he thought, here's a guy who has been sort of blessed beyond measure. He's lived a crazy life.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's a bit of a disaster, and so we needed like a mindset, we needed an arc for our story.
Yeah.
We needed it to start somewhere and to go somewhere else, so I loved that. I mean, that I think that's when it really took off for me as a story, is once we knew, okay, we're starting at a point of utter despair for our character, and that was, a really important, that's what he should feel like. And I think that's where I feel like I'm not suggesting that connects personally to you in an extreme way, but I think all of us have experienced times, now it doesn't have to be in a Christian context, it can be in any context, where we just feel like, man, this isn't working, or the meaning is lacking. Yeah.
Or where I thought I'd be is not where I am. And, and life is, a lot harder than I thought. I love one of the things I love when we started. Well, you're the one who really kind of brought that Ecclesiastes thing to the table. But what I loved was that there's this pairing of, the cries of the heart from the Psalms, which we have peppered through the whole film, and then there's the kind of the wisdom. Ancient wisdom of Ecclesiastes, everything's meaningless, all these big human questions, which again, Solomon says, but Solomon writes it down, but where does it come from? It comes from David. And I think, there's a David looking at his dad going, boy, Dad, you're a bit of a disaster. And then funny enough, Solomon becomes a bit of a disaster at the end of his life too, even though he was the greatest king ever. And so there's the framing of wisdom in the midst of this story is really helpful, and really helpful for us as we're trying to unpack a guy who's just desperate to get on the other side of despair and to learn how to listen again. I mean, I would say that's in my life too, it's like in the midst of all the challenges, how do you silence the noise of paying bills and challenges with family and all the stuff that we all have? How do you get to that place of listening so that the peace can come? And I think ultimately we got that by asking these structural questions around wisdom and allowing the heart to be, I guess not released, but like we were allowed the expression of the heart through the Psalms, which you see as David finally gets to the end and realizes, wait a minute, I'm the reason that I can't hear. Like I've screwed it up. But you've got to get to the, like, you've got to start with it's all meaningless in order to get to, oh, wait a minute, I screwed it up. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, what did that give us? What made the story, that's when it started to come together in a way. So what we have is a guy who is going to have to go back and think about his life, right? So he's going to have to remember his life. So one, it gives us a vehicle to go in and retell, reimagine, re-experience those stories from youth. But it's you remembering those. So so I think that was a super cool element of what that story would give us. And then I think it also gave us kind of an emotion that it's all that despair is almost it's almost madness at the beginning, because there's a part of the story where you're still kind of playing characters and there's some voices. These are carryovers from your theatrical thing, but part of that is they're really, we wanted to honor, I think, what you had done, 25 years before. Saying that, look, it had been working and it had a huge impact on people for years, and we were going to do a one-man show. Which neither of us were totally convinced was going to work anyway.
No,
right?
We were not convinced it was going to work.
So how do you, overcome all these problems? So I mean, I'm just getting us to the start line here, of making this film, right? So the start line comes, I think, when we realize, okay, we have a character, we know who he is. He's an older guy. Things are not going well. He is in despair. He's kind of, life is meaningless, and what is he going to do? Well, he's going to go back and remember. But he's not a guy in a great mental space, so it kind of gives us that lenience to have him almost embody these characters and do it in a way. So really now we can reimagine, we can go back and do some of these other characters, and you can play these characters in a way that makes sense in our story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the other epiphany that we kind of had along the way, which was, okay, we didn't want to have a guy who was going back and forth, like you say, on a theater piece where you're playing like Saul and then David and then Saul. But instead we wanted to have David trying to like remember the voice of how did Saul sound? Remember, like, what did Nathan feel like? So he's grappling with these characters. And it was so fun when we did a pre-screening of the film in both at Freswick Castle up in northern Scotland and in Edinburgh in the summer, and a couple people brought up Macbeth and King Lear, and I hadn't even, like, as soon as they said it, I'm like, oh, those are the things I was thinking about. Like, it was so buried in my subconscious and they started to mention, I'm like, oh, that's what we were doing. Like Macbeth's talking to himself through the whole deal. Hamlet is talking to himself through, like, all these incredible Shakespearean characters who are doing the same thing that we did in the film, where you're like, so in one instance you're thinking, is that actor playing Nathan? Oh, wait a minute. No, he's trying to, oh, that's not what he's doing. And we wanted that confusion. We wanted that kind of ambiguity to be there, where you're like, what's going on? Because I think, I don't know, I kind of do that. I play that out, maybe not out loud and like a madman in my own life, but we do think through those. When you think back to, like, who are the characters that stuck in your mind, who are formative in your growth for good or for bad. And so that was a really, like, that shift from playing a character to actually it being David's subconscious or his psyche. That was also super helpful in the way we were able to frame things then.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was the key to unlocking thing, the whole story. The other thing is we were in Scotland, so we haven't,
Thanks for joining the conversation about the Shepherd and the Sound film, community encounter, and immersive gallery encounter. If this is resonating with you, like this video and subscribe to the Presence Creative Arts YouTube channel. Please leave us a comment. We want to know what spoke to you, where you'd like to see this project travel next, and what you'd like to hear our team discuss in the next episode. For more Presence Creative Arts content that will unlock, connect, and transform you, Visit PresenceCreativeArts.com to see our library of productions and where we'll be performing next. This is real. The eternal is real. We sincerely thank you for being here, and we will see you next time.